I'm reading a book right now called Damn Good Advice by George Lewis. For those that don't know, he's the character that Mad Men's Don Draper was based off of. It's really interesting to read an advice book written as advertisements. I find it's a very medium is the message thing. Anyways, basing this one off of a post I had done where I had finally joined Facebook again with the normies. And this guy Anthony started posting about his problem with his wife, and he got a flood of messages from a bunch of guys about all the things he should be doing. And so here we go. The 5 archetypes when it comes to males giving advice, and why 4 of them are garbage. The story itself was pretty plain Jane. A guy was essentially screwing up everything. He was cheating on his wife. The marriage was falling apart. He's very religious. The girl wanted to fight to put it back together again, but they just hate each other. The way he describes his story, it almost goes through the exact same routine that you see on every field report or every guy who first starts talking about his problems in hopes that he can fix them. The story is told from the wife's main point of view. She's the main character, and everything she does is wrong. Everything he does is irrelevant. Now, I don't mean this to crap on the guy, because that's not the case of it at all. The interesting part of it was the advice that guys gave. So I used some names to describe the first one. First one is Daniel. And Daniel knows that he is the herd. He has no insight. He doesn't have any understanding, empathy, sympathy. He doesn't really even care about Anthony in this case. Daniel is what I call a Neolithic man, or a new caveman. He worships the woman of Willendorf, or Venus of Willendorf. Have you never heard of that before? That's a foot-tall sculpture they found. It's dated somewhere between 20 and 30,000 BC. It's a extremely voluptuous nude woman carved out of a statue. She was the fertility god of the cavemen. And she was the original god of mankind. So I like to think that we pretend with all of our fancy and newfangled technology that we've advanced past this, but we've either regressed or perhaps never even left that same core belief that what we worship is women, our one true God. Jesus is dead, but Venus lives forever. The second type is Peter. Now Peter doesn't know anything, but Peter likes to be a part of things. He uses a lot of words, but they are meaningless pablum. Peter is afraid to make a call, to stand by a judgment, to take ownership over the advice he gives. He is afraid to search his experiences for any insight. Peter just wants a friend. Peter wants to be heard. Peter will say what he has to say to fill the room with noise because that's what Peter wants to do. We all know humans are social creatures, so the more words we use, the more human we are, right? And through this puking of sweet, sweet words, Peter hopes that he's going to drown out the stench of reality. I jokingly called it a testicular cancer meeting where it's okay, Cornelius, you can cry now. Scene where they cry into Bob in his chest. And these are the guys that always tell you random pablin like, flip a coin, sometimes it's heads, sometimes it's tails. Good luck with that. Peter's even worse than Daniel, by the way. At least Daniel has a goal. Peter just loves to play with himself and pretend it's useful. Third type is David. Now, David's no smarter than Peter, but David is somewhat self-aware. David knows that he has no advice. He knows he has no utility. He can't really offer anything. David is not a sheep in search of a shepherd. David is a reinforcer of his shepherd. David is the kind of guy whose the only advice he will give you is to point to an authority and tell you to go ask him. These take many forms. A lot of guys will say go to your pastor. A lot of guys will use marriage counselors as if they are the be-all and end-all of authority because it has the words marriage and counseling in it. And if a guy's looking for counseling and is married, it makes sense. It's the exact same reason that we got the Patriot Act enacted in the US, which had neither patriots nor acts in it. Dave even goes so far to think as the man in the sky can be an authority. Just think real hard and Jesus will put the answer in your head. David's the most useless one at all because he's not even a real person. He's just an extension of an authority. And that authority, if it worked, you wouldn't need to tell people to go to him. They tend to find their way to our space because they've already gone to those authorities and the advice they gave was worthless. The next one is Darren. And Darren isn't just guys like me or guys in this space. There's always varying degrees of Darren in very switched on guys. But he's that one guy who quietly sits in the corner and has some insight. He looks past the story, reads between the lines. Darren may have heard this story 100 times already, maybe from experience, maybe because he's lived a hard life, and he knows how the endings go. So when Anthony tells this sob story and he misses certain details or he adds others, Darren already knows that there's something there that either Anthony wants us to know or Anthony wants to hide from us. After all, when you tell somebody a story, you add the details that you consider important. And so when you hide story tales that other people would have added, you can tell that the person that's telling the story is probably either ashamed, unaware, or fully aware that that's where he's screwing up and he tries to hide it. It's something that Dr. Glover from No More Mr. Nice Guy calls hiding the badness. And the final guy. I had to save this guy for last because he's completely useless. This is Cliff. Then there's Clifford. Clifford, he's got a bone to pick. What put the stick up his ass? What's his bone to pick? With what? Who knows? The only thing I can tell you is that whatever he says, it's got nothing to do with Anthony. Nothing to do with that guy who wants help. Cliff takes every opportunity and he turns that into himself. Sure, maybe in this story, Anthony telling his story is a man of faith and decides he needs to rant about his own crappy childhood, why the faith destroyed him. Cliff is actually another type of narcissist who got dropped into somebody else's story and now is desperately fighting to make it about himself. And all it takes, the only thing you need to completely derail one of these things, are two Cliffords. Now we can safely ignore Anthony and his original story. They stand there in their testicular cancer meeting by the coffee machine, bickering with the Hegelian method. Am I pronouncing that right? Hegelian? Whatever. But they argue like that because Bloodsport is how we solve problems, apparently. No one likes Cliff. Cliff doesn't even like Cliff. But Cliff doesn't care, because he's too busy masturbating in the mirror and throwing it in his own face. Again, nobody likes Cliff. So to end this off, here's the takeaway from it. These 5 male archetypes are usually what happens when anybody comes asking for advice or trying to get a problem solved in their life. As a man, it behooves you to take a look at these 5 archetypes and see which one encapsulate the way you deal with these things. And learn to be more of a Darren. That guy with insight, the guy with experience, the guy who knows how to solve problems and think for himself. So are you a Daniel? Are you that guy who doesn't really care about other men and just wants to bully them into following the herd? If that's the case, you gotta realize you're kind of an NPC, and you really need to start carving your own path and letting other people carve theirs. For the most part, we're gonna be social enough to get along without having to jam them into whatever box you want them to be in. If you're a Peter, and you don't know how to do anything but run your mouth, say a lot of words, not really stand by anything, well, the easy solution there is just to be quiet until you have something you're willing to stand behind. If you're a David, if all you know how to do is reinforce somebody else's authority, you need to start becoming your own mental point of origin and become your own authority. Nobody likes a man who's just the shadow of another man. Worst off, if you're a Cliff, then whatever chip you have on your shoulder, whatever stick you have up your butt, you gotta let it go. Stop making everything about you. Nobody cares. I guarantee you're going to be more valuable on a social level if you start thinking of the value proposition of when you open your mouth. People don't exist for you to argue about your problems with. So be more of a Darren. Be a guy with experience who's learned insight, self-actualization, a guy who makes lives better for those around him. Or don't. Give crappy advice. It's not like there's a shortage of it. As always, a great shout out to the Patreon community. You guys make this all possible. Sign up if you want. For less than 20 cents a day, we do weekly Q&As where we talk about tons of concepts, way more advanced than this, and we get into depth, as well as we aren't worried about hurting a couple people's feelings. It's that little bit of secret conversations that you can't really have in polite society. And as always, take care, guys.